All right, and we are live. This is episode number 11. Oh, hold up. This is episode number 11 of Calibrated Live. Calibrated Live, yeah. Episode number 11. I hope you guys enjoyed your weekend. I had a good little trip that I took, so I haven't been super present on social media and stuff, but it's all good. I'm back, and now we're going to get right back into it, huh? So I hope everybody's doing good today. We have a few Ukraine updates. News is kind of slow right now. So it's sort of this lull in the action, just globally. Everybody's kind of waiting for things to develop, in my personal opinion. So, I mean, there is news, but it's not like super urgent. It's a lot of diplomatic news, a lot of foreign policy and political news. So not as much kinetic news on the ground in the Middle East and in Ukraine. But we do have some changes to the map. So I'm going to take us over to that real fast. Okay. Sorry, I was looking at the Syrian-Jordan border for specific reasons. All right. So I guess we'll just start with the first update that we have, which is in the Novomikhailivka area. The Russians have come down through this tree line, secured this tree line. They say out into this field somewhere. I don't exactly know where the Russian positions are in and around this area, but basically this whole area now is sort of gray zone. The Russians captured this fortification that the Ukrainians were using as a defensive point in this region. Once that fell, all of this territory came very, very quickly. And now there's basically just this gap of space that neither the Russians nor the Ukrainians are in control of right now. But it shouldn't be too long before the Russians push into this gray area, potentially push into this area right here and start flanking Novomikhailivka from the north, basically forcing a retreat by the AFU back to Pereskokiivka and Konstantinivka on the 00532 highway that leads to Ugledar. So again, the Ukrainians are doing everything in their power still to hold the line across the entire front. And in this area in particular, they are constantly counterattacking, trying to keep the Russians away from this highway, try to keep supply to Ugledar open, and prevent Novomikhailivka from falling. But the Russians are continuously making progress, so we'll see how the developments continue around Novomikhailivka. Up to Avdiivka, we do have some geolocations that show Russian progress to the, what would you call this, west of Kupiansk right here. So I just filled in this field to level out the front sort of along this line. I imagine the front right here is pretty level just in general, but we don't know, so we're just going to leave it the way it is. Again, we have rumors of Russian control over this area, but no geolocation as of right now to confirm that. Then down to the south, the Russians took control of this fortification, which is another very old fortification that the Ukrainians have been using for the defense of Avdiivka for a very long time. The Russians secured it, much like the fortifications in this area. This is a big deal, and it exposes more and more territory to possible Russian advance. And then this went from purple to confirmed zone of control. We have a geolocation here of Ukrainian shelling of Russian vehicles. So confirms that the Russians are at almost the most northern point of this subdivision. So this is what the front is looking like. Actually, we'll move this because they're not up in that next. There you go. Something like that. Okay. Let's move up to Bakhmut, where we haven't seen very much progress, constant battles. There's some gray zone that has developed between Ivanivsky and Bakhmut right here. But the Ukrainians and Russians are constantly counterattacking. This area is just a grind. It's just the Ukrainians are refusing to back out of any single position, and the Russians are just hammering them day and night. Not as much pushing as around Novomihailovka or Avdiivka here, but it does continue. And then up to the north, we have some more progress around Bilohorivka, where the Russians have pushed through these fields, and then as well this little nodule up here, progress down the Seversky Donets River. The Russians do seem to want to take advantage of perhaps the lower availability of reserves for some certain areas. So tactical advancements around the Seversk salient should be expected. And then coming up to Kupiansk, where we actually have the biggest news and the most difficult area for the AFU currently, and that is around Tabivka, up in the Kharkov LPR border region, on the highway to Kupiansk, and probably the quickest route to cut off supply to this entire southern area. Obviously, a lot of the bridges across the Oskol River have been taken out, so supply in this area is already difficult. And with the Russians making these advancements, getting up on the high ground that runs right down along here, which was the significant part of the capture of this settlement. As you can see, this settlement is actually in a valley. On both sides, there's high ground. The Russians had secured this high ground. The town became gray zone, and then the Russians ended up pushing out and capturing the hills to the west of Tabivka, which allows Russian forces to have full control over this area. And then this progress was just reported today, and it has not been geo-confirmed yet. So, but again, this is another massive step. The Russians have now closed the distance, reportedly have closed the distance on Berestove. And if you can see how this area is going to become very, very problematic for the Ukrainians. They don't have really much in this whole area to defend the Russians. As soon as Pishchin collapses to Russian pressure, as soon as Berestove collapses to Russian pressure, the Russians should be able to push through these fields and apply a significant amount of pressure to this last logistical line that supplies this entire front. So this is a very big deal. This is a significant Russian breakthrough. I don't know what happened to the Ukrainians in this region, because they've been receiving a good majority of the available reserves and equipment, trying to hold this Kupiansk salient, especially up here around Zinkivka. There's been a lot of fighting. We have minimal Russian progress. The Russians just kind of come into this area and then get pushed out, and then come back in and get pushed out. So again, remember, these battles are attrition wars. If the Russians can advance, they will advance where they have the opportunity to, and then they'll stop, consolidate, slow down, and then restart the bombardment with artillery and glide bombs and drones, wear the enemy down, enemy if you're Russian, and then push in. So that's the front. Like I said, not a bunch of changes, but some specifically significant events that are occurring. Let's see. Move that. All right. Okay, well, I just see Glenn spamming, so you're gonna go ahead and get removed. Cool. 'Cause nobody really wants to see you. How do I do it? Ah, we'll do it later. Ignore Glenn. He's being annoying. All right. I wanted to talk a little bit about the ongoing situation in the Middle East. We have, let's see, we have a recent Iranian-backed militia drone attack on a U.S. base on the Syrian-Jordan border. Again, you all know my position. I'll just take you guys down to where this attack occurred. It was directly around this area. Let's see. Got to bring up the map. All right. So it was in this area on the Syrian Jordan border. I'm trying to. I just found it just a second ago. Oh, it's up here. That's why. That's why I was in the wrong spot. All right. So this is one of the. There's a U.S. base in this region. Here's the Syrian Jordan border. There is a basically a guard station right here. It's called Tower 22, and this is in the Area 55 zone of Syria. That's what they call it. Basically, the location of the base that was hit was in Jordan, but it is right on the border, and it allows for operations to occur into Syria, illegal operations by the U.S. into Syria, and that is probably the reason why it was targeted. As well as the base in Syria was targeted as well. So that ended up resulting in the deaths of 3 American service members, as well as injuries to another 40 were reported, different levels of traumatic brain injury and so on. Probably like shrapnel wounds. The drone that was used was reportedly a Shahed or a Garand 2 model. So provided by the Iranian military in some fashion to these militias, and then the attack ended up hitting a American base. I presume a barracks was hit because that number of casualties is a lot of people in a very small area to get hit by a single drone. So they likely struck a barracks building, and yeah, 3 Americans lost their lives. So this entire region is currently on edge. We have rumors of an Israeli preparation to invade southern Lebanon. We'll see if that happens. I'm not really sure if that's going to happen. And then we have this attack on this base, which the U.S. has come out and said that they are going to respond to. And everybody's kind of waiting on bated breath to see what the U.S. does exactly. Are they going to just attack U.S. locations, or I'm sorry, is the U.S. going to attack Iranian militia locations in Syria and Iraq? Maybe are they going to actually strike targets in Iran? What's going to happen? Time will tell. We just don't know. I expect the U.S. response to be kind of weak. Both Iran and the U.S. don't really want a regional conflict. Israel does want a regional conflict, but the big players are still being very careful about all of their actions in this region, trying to prevent that sort of conflict. So we'll see how the situation ends up developing and how it goes from here on out. Let's see. Does anybody have any questions, any topics that they want me to go over? I don't have a whole lot to talk about today just because there's not a lot going on. So if you guys have questions now, go ahead and start throwing them up. I'll do a little Q&A for a little while here. Try to get some conversation going because there's just not a lot in terms of news. Ukraine is reportedly going to be receiving 90 kilometer ranged bomblets for their munitions bombs for their HIMARS systems. So that could be a new development, a new weapon system that we're seeing on the battlefield. But again, not a lot is going on. So Just not a lot happening right now. Let's see. Questions. Anybody have any questions? Militia operating from within formal Syrian borders. Yeah, so the IRGC has ties to Islamic militias all over the Middle East. Hezbollah is the big one. The Houthis in Yemen, they have their Islamic resistance in Syria and Iraq as well. So uh, the Iran has hands everywhere working constantly. So where this attack came from, it doesn't really matter because everybody knows it came from Iran in one way or another, even though they deny some of the claims. Of course they do, just like everybody denies all of their proxies missteps, or however you would like to describe it. That's the whole point of a proxy, is that you can deny whatever action they underwent, even though you want that to happen. You just say, oh, that wasn't us, that was them. And then it's kind of like, well, are you going to react to us doing that sort of thing? So uh, it really just depends on what the U.S. does, and then how the units in this region respond. There have been some statements coming out saying that the group that is responsible for the strike said that they were not going to target U.S. personnel anymore in the region. But at this time, I mean, it's already too late. It's already happened, so you can't really put that cat back in the bag. Let's see. If it was an Iranian drone, then where's the evidence? I don't really think they need evidence. I mean, the Iranians have been hitting U.S. bases in the region for a while now, so this is nothing new. Iranian-backed militias, not Iran directly, but the militias that they fund and support. Do you think that Russia has any influence on Iranian policies in the Middle East? I mean, they have some say, I guess, in the form of what any ally has to say about an action. Uh, as long as it doesn't interfere with Russian interests and doesn't interfere with a specific Russian plan that they have in a region, I don't think that the Russians really have much pull with what the Iranians do. They might make requests that they don't do specific things at certain times, but Iran is its own country. It's going to do what's in its own best interests. Sometimes that aligns with Russia, sometimes it doesn't. Let's see. Are you able to talk about how the Ukrainian defenses are structured? I get confused about how the Russians have trouble taking small villages like Sinkivka and Stepove. Yeah, so I mean, I can show you sort of like a small example, and I can show it to you in Avdiivka. So along a majority of the front, even up in the Kupiansk area, it's not quite as dense, but there are fortifications like this. So when you're looking at these maps, we use satellite maps, or I use satellite maps at least, so I can tell where individual buildings are and stuff. You have to have like specific geolocations, and using blank maps doesn't work as well. But really, when it comes to looking at something like a quote unquote small village, it's not necessarily the village that's the issue. Like Severne doesn't exist anymore. Like this town right here has been completely erased from the map. It has no value at all. There's not even basements here. All of these buildings have been hit with hundreds of artillery shells, drones, all sorts of stuff. So there's nothing here, right? It's not the actual town. It's all of these tree lines right here that you see, the tree lines here, the tree lines here. They are just filled with like basically foxholes and trench lines and actual built-in fortifications that the Ukrainians will go into. You've seen a lot of Russian FPV drones actually flying into these fortifications, and that's what the Russians have to do. So to make a little bit of progress, the Russians have to hit let's just say, in this defensive line right here, there's like trenches that go like this, and this is how the Russians were very successful in their uh, during the counteroffensive in the south. Is that, a lot of the fortifications that we could see on satellites were actually sort of decoys. They were out, the ones that were out in the open. You could see the buildings, the structures very clearly. They were sort of decoys to try to prevent uh, to try to draw Russia or Ukrainian artillery fire. And then they would keep the fortifications that were actually covered up by foliage in the tree lines, like we're seeing here on the satellite map, safe. So you have like something like this, right? You have this whole set of fortifications in this tree line, and it doesn't look like anything. So you're like, why can't the Russians just push up and just take this? It's like an open field. There's nothing going on here. Yeah, maybe the Ukrainians hit them with artillery shells, but what's going on? When really they have whole logistics lines that run through these tree lines. They have whole trench fortifications, and the Russians have to hit each individual position that the Ukrainians are holding with machine guns, with mortars, with whatever they're equipped with in these areas. They have to hit them with FPV drones, artillery, basically level this entire thing, make the position untenable for the Ukrainians, and then move in after that's done. So, one tree line could be more significant than, say, like the whole village of Severne. If the Ukrainians were to lose, say, this position right here, because that might be where the Ukrainians have a massive position. And remember also, these maps are very old. So you're not exactly seeing the complexity and the depth of the fortifications in this area. New fortifications are being dug constantly. So this is just, you won't ever see it on a map, and it might be confusing as to why something takes so long, or, whatever. Like, you come down here and we look at the Ukrainian counteroffensive. The Ukrainian counteroffensive achieved literally almost nothing, right? It didn't do any of what it was supposed to do. A lot of the Ukrainian men that were committed here were killed. The brigades lost their combat capability. A lot of Western equipment was lost, so on and so forth. And it might seem really funny that, like, oh, they choked, they didn't do what they were supposed to do. But when you actually look at how the Russians had set up their layered defense, it wasn't just the main lines of defense. The Russians had trench lines all throughout all of these tree lines. They had I think it was something like 450,000 mines were laid in the Zaporozhye region alone in anticipation of the counteroffensive. So they had pre-set up kill zones with artillery. They had drones that were watching certain particular approach points. They had minefields everywhere. They had ATGM crews that were mobile. They had Ka-52 helicopters, which were just like air ATGM crews. And we saw that this, what was supposed to be Rabitny in 1 day or 2 days, and that's not me putting a timeline on it. It's the approach that the Ukrainians went with. They were looking for a breakthrough that would open up and then rout the Russians out of this area. And instead, what they walked into was a overly complex security zone, and they just got absolutely ruined here. And they ended up getting Rabitny after like a month and a half, and then nothing more throughout the entire counteroffensive. Same goes up here on the ledge. They captured like Makarivka and Stratomayorsk and Urozhain, but then, couldn't get any further. And this was not even the first defense line. This is the security zone. So the Russians did an excellent job of providing false intelligence to the Ukrainians, perhaps a false sense of security. And, that's what happened there. So when you're looking at these areas like Sinkivka, like it doesn't seem like the Russians should be stuck here, right? But what you have to realize is that the Russians are dealing with the shortest logistics spot for the Ukrainians, right? Sinkivka is the easiest line right now for the Ukrainians to hold because of their proximity to Kupiansk. Kupiansk allows for easy logistics up into this area, and it's much more difficult for Russian logistics in this area. I mean, they literally have to come down either through Russia or back through this highway. So the ability for Ukraine to transfer troops here in a short amount of time to stem a breakthrough is much easier. It's much easier to direct artillery fire from this bank of the Oskol, into Kharkov proper on this little village of Sinkivka. And so while this is very important to the capture of Kupiansk, it is the area that is the most easily defended. And that's why we're seeing progress down here, where when the Ukrainians get away from their sort of security zone and their easy logistics, things start to become less tenable. The same goes for Avdiivka. I'll just show you guys another example around Avdiivka. Pushing into Stepove should be easy, right? Stepove is nothing, even though there's fortifications here that you cannot see. It's small. It shouldn't be a big deal. But the Ukrainians operating out of Orchitny right here have an easy logistics line through Berdichi to hold Stepove. This whole flank is much easier to hold for the Ukrainians with their artillery availability and everything to hold the Russians back in this area. Meanwhile, in areas like this, where it is at the furthest point of the salient, 8, 9, 10 miles from the last staging point before you enter the city in Orlivka, the Ukrainians do not have the artillery support. They do not have the logistics, the easy logistics that the Russians have out of Donetsk. So the Russians are going to make progress here. And when there is a breakthrough, the Ukrainians are going to have a much harder time preventing that breakthrough from expanding and becoming something more difficult to control. So I hope that kind of answers that question for you. Let's see. Let's see. If you guys have any questions, go ahead and hit me with them. I'm just going to do something real fast. Cool. All right. Let's see. Questions. Oh, I got you. Okay. All right. Let's see. How long will it take to capture Avdiivka, in your opinion? Like I said, I don't think that Avdiivka necessarily has a time stamp on it. I don't think the Russians really care. This is not a good position for the Ukrainians. They're continuously blowing reserves, holding this that could be set aside for future offensives, for future defenses. So if the Ukrainians want to keep throwing men and material into this salient, why not let them? That's kind of been the Russian plan of attack this entire war, and I don't see why that would change anytime soon, to be honest. Realistically, with the way the progress is, I would say probably April, maybe May, just like Bakhmut, kind of the same timeline. Just as long as as long as the Ukrainians keep feeding it, and as long as the Russians can keep making progress outside of it, while the attention is focused around here, there is no need to end it quickly. Let's see. How many Russians do you think have died in 4 months of the offensive? I have no idea, man. That's such a nobody knows the answer to that question. Nobody knows what's going on. I would say probably consistent with normal Russian losses when it comes to offensive operations. Like anybody who gives you a number when you ask how many losses are there, they have no idea. There's only a few people who know the actual losses. It's the Russian government, who's not going to tell you the real number, and the Ukrainian government, who's not going to tell you the real number. We can look off of places like Mediazona, who do social media tracking, and it's hard to hide bodies. So I would think that Mediazona is probably 10 to 20,000 plus or minus I mean not minus, but plus what the actual death toll for the Russians is in Ukraine. What it has been since they've started the offensive, obviously higher than it was before they started the offensive. But anybody who gives you a number is bullshitting you. Let's see. Nobody puts out Russian numbers. They must be high. No, the Ukrainians also don't put out numbers, so they must be high. That's the exact same logic. I mean, they put out their own numbers. They say 13,000, which is obviously a lie. The Russians have said, what, 40,000 was the last number I think I saw Shoigu say, and that was in 2022. So who knows, honestly? No, nobody knows. And if they are telling you that, they're lying to you. Why use 12 T-90 Tu-95s if you're only launching 15 cruise missiles? Because you put an unknown number of missile carriers up in the air, or a known number, sorry, with an unknown number of missiles. The Ukrainians have to react to every single radar blip they see as if it is a cruise missile heading for a sensitive target. So you can launch 30 decoys and 15 KH-101s, and if the Ukrainians have to shoot at everything, they're wasting all of their expensive air defense missiles on decoys because they think, oh, the Russians sent up 12 Tu-95s. They must be launching a 100 missile barrage, when that's just not the case. I often think that the Ukrainian claims about the amount of missiles that are launched is often exaggerated, and that the Russians are actually accomplishing a lot more with a lot less than what's being stated. A Metazona estimate in July that by the end of May died approximately 40,000 Russians. It was almost a year ago. Now, you can go look at it right now. You can go look at it. You can go look at the actual live counter. They update it like every week or so. Yeah, when it comes to Ukrainian casualties, again, I have no idea. But you have to look at the cemeteries. You have to look at, we don't see cemeteries like that in Russia. We have the one Wagner cemetery, and we have other smaller military funerals, but it's just nothing compared to what we see in Ukraine, in Lvov, and some of these other places. These military cemeteries are growing exponentially, and it's not a very good sign. It's also not a very good sign when Ukraine is talking about how they're having an extremely difficult time actually mobilizing men, because they're running out of men in the areas that are the easiest to mobilize from. That would be the areas that don't have as much political pull or as much money. And that's the poorer, usually Russian-speaking areas. Yeah, it can't be good, right? The situation cannot be good for Ukraine in terms of their available and well-trained manpower. Scott, what happens if NATO troops occupy Odessa, Kharkov, Nikolaev before the Russians get there? I don't see that happening. I mean, unless something dramatic happens, we have a lot bigger issues to worry about if the U.S. steps in and is present in these regions in a non-NATO country, a non-EU country. That would be a very, 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 very bad situation. And I hope that we don't have that, because we won't be worried so much about what's going on in Ukraine if that ends up happening. Let's see. 1,685 dead Russians the last 3 weeks on Mediazona. Okay, no, that seems like realistic. In the last 3 weeks, you have 1,600 casualties. That seems like a pretty actual, decent, estimate in terms of what the Russians are losing along this front line in that amount of time. You have to remember the Russians have an artillery advantage, an aviation advantage, a drone advantage. They have deep strike advantage. They have, everything. The Russians are not outclassed in a single way in this conflict. And now even the manpower concentrations, Russia is beginning to have a major advantage, and that's why you're seeing Russian progress. So you have to remember that the Ukrainians can just not deal the same amount of damage that the Russians can mathematically. Our Ukrainian artillery is not more accurate than Russian artillery. Ukrainian bombs are not more accurate than Russian bombs. Ukrainian missiles are not more accurate or more numerous than Russian missiles. So the Russians are doing more damage, just purely speaking mathematically, when they're firing 5 times the artillery shells that Ukraine is. There's just no. Every single day we see Iskanders coming down in Kharkov, and we don't see anything like that in return towards the Russians. Every single day we see 50, 60 fabs across the front getting dropped gliding bombs. We don't see anything in return from the Ukrainians. Every night we have multiple groups of Garand 2 drones hitting things, and we see nothing like that from the Ukrainians. Every now and then the Ukrainians will strike an oil infrastructure facility in St. Petersburg, hundreds of miles away from the actual conflict zone, and it does nothing. So that's the difference. And if you ignore that, you're just being intellectually dishonest, and you should really reevaluate how you are approaching your analysis of this conflict. Let's see. I saw my name somewhere. I think Scott has me blocked or ignores me. LOL, he skipped all my questions. No, guys, I'm not trying to skip your questions, and I don't have you blocked. It just moves kind of quick, and I just go through, and I'm looking for a question mark. So throw it back up. Remember, if you guys super chat or super thanks or whatever and put your question in there, I'll definitely for sure get to it. And if I miss it, I'm sorry. Is it cheaper for the Ukrainian government to support missing in action instead of KIA? Yes, it is. They don't have to pay the families if the men are missing in action. So it is much cheaper for the Ukrainians to do that. And also, a lot of the times, the Ukrainian leadership won't even report that these guys have died. They'll say that they're still alive, operating, and continue collecting their payment, which is a regular thing in the Ukrainian military. And if you don't think that's true, then you should go listen to some Ukrainians talk about it. How many 152 millimeter artillery shells are depleted by the Russian side currently? Ballpark figure. Are depleted? Oh, I have no idea. Just to give you a rough estimate, the last numbers I saw were that the Russians were firing around 10,000 artillery shells of all kinds across the front a day. So 152 millimeter would probably make up 40 to 50% of that. So I'd say probably 4,000 to 5,000 artillery shells a day. But I couldn't give you a specific number. Do you think drones cause more loss than artillery? It just depends. Drones have this ability to, pinpoint, target an enemy and destroy, or an enemy location and destroy it. Whereas artillery is sort of a suppression weapon. You fire these HE shells in a general direction, and it is sometimes accurate. It is sometimes accurate, but it doesn't necessarily, drop exactly where you want it every time. There's wind, there's all sorts of variables that can make it miss. The idea with artillery is that you are saturating an area with high explosive shells, which is much better for certain types of defense and attacks. When the Ukrainians are out in the open pushing you, I would much rather have 15 barrels of artillery firing on those Ukrainians than having 2 drone operators fly drones at these guys. There is a fire support superiority aspect that comes into all of this analysis, and the Russians have it. So let's see. Let's see. Calibrated. Anything new about alleged A-50 shoot down? No, I haven't seen anything about the A-50. The only thing we saw was one mention of it on a fighter bomber post. We haven't seen any obituaries, 11 high-ranking officers. That's incredibly difficult to hide. 10 or 11 was what was reportedly on the plane that went down. We haven't seen any significant evidence of anything. Again, just a phantom plane that went down in a shallow sea. No visuals, no nothing, and no mention of it from the Russian MOD or no obituaries, which is the big thing. I'll just tell you guys when when the IL-76 went down and when the IL-22 was hit, within 4 hours, we saw the tail section of the IL-22 that had been riddled with shrapnel from an air defense missile. And then a couple of days later, we received the obituary of the individual who later died of the wounds that was sustained on that aircraft from that air defense missile. In the case of the IL-76, within a couple hours, we had the names and faces of every single pilot and crew member that were on board. Maybe not the military men. There were 3 military men on board. I don't know if we saw them, but the flight crew, we got all of their pictures, and we got photos and videos of the crash right away. Russia does not have the same censorship regime that Ukraine does. So anytime there's an attack, we usually see evidence of it pretty quick. So with that A-50, I mean, it could have been shot down, but that's just he said, she said, honestly. There is absolutely no proof other than a radar video that was released by the Ukrainian government, and it was like edited and weird. So, yeah, let's see. Questions. What do you think the U.S. will bomb in retaliation for the Jordan attack? I usually they hit tents and punch sand, but we'll see. They might go after important individuals, VIPs. They have intelligence, so I just don't have any faith that any of that is ever going to do anything. You kill. It's a hydra, right? You cut one head off, another one grows in its place. So. No matter how many no matter how many of the leadership you kill, it never really changes the fact that the organization is built off of martyrdom, right? So that's what they expect to happen. Dying is the good end result there. So I mean, it's kind of expected. What do you think will be the biggest battle of this war? I think it's probably already happened. I think that the biggest battle of this war has probably already happened. It was probably the Battle of Mariupol. I don't see how it's going to be topped just because of the way that battle played out with the city being surrounded, the siege happening, stuff like that. There might be bigger, longer battles, like Bakhmut was like a bigger battle, but in terms of like the impact it has, I don't think anything's going to beat Mariupol in this conflict, but we'll see. Could be Kharkov, could be a big one. I just don't see the war going in that direction, though. Scott, let's see. If the U.S. and Iran go at it, what is the chance that terrorist activity increases on U.S. soil since we do not cross the border lately? I mean, there's always a chance. I just don't think that that's going to be a really big thing. I think that if there is a war between the U.S. and Iran, that it's going to be a lot of regional in theater conflict between the U.S. and Iran. So Iran targeting U.S. ships, closing the Strait of Hormuz, potentially doing that sort of stuff. But in terms of attacks on U.S. soil, I just don't see it being very likely to happen. Not saying it can't happen. A terrorist attack could happen, but consistent terrorist attacks, no. I don't think that the Iranians have that kind of cell network in the United States. What do you say about the news that Ukraine will receive GLSBD or DB, bombs from the United States tomorrow? This is just another. What else can we possibly send to give them some sort of way to stay in the headlines? That's all it is. Again, it doesn't really expand their abilities. We haven't seen any HIMARS strikes for forever now. Like HIMARS are just sitting around, I guess, because we literally have not seen a HIMARS strike in weeks, probably at this point. Nor have we seen very much Storm Shadow activity. They get these influxes of missiles and then nothing happens after they use them. So it's sort of like whenever we get it, we use it, we burn through it, it goes away. Scott Ritter claims that the Russians going to capture at least 4 more Ukrainian oblasts, including Odessa. Your thoughts? I mean, I think that the Russians are going to achieve whatever they want to achieve in Ukraine, and however long it takes, they're just going to do it. I think that that's the goal. So, um, you know, as the Ukrainian government. Oh shit! You know what I should talk about? Zaluzhny. I forgot about this. As the Ukrainian government begins to have deeper infighting, as the situation becomes worse and worse, and if if Ukraine doesn't get financial support here soon from the EU or the United States, there's going to be real issues coming up very very quick. So you know, I think that the Russians are just going to play the long game, and why not? When we already have rumors coming out that Zaluzhny is going to be removed, I think that this decision was made yesterday, and I think it was leaked to the public by some very unhappy individuals. And the Ukrainian MOD came out and said, no, that's not what's happening, blah blah blah. But then today we get more rumors that he's been replaced, that he's going to be replaced, this and that and the other. So obviously, time will tell. Don't jump on anything yet, but it looks like Zaluzhny is probably going to be removed from his position, and that is going to further uh, complicate the situation, because you can tell that the political leadership is now going to be making a lot of the decisions for the military, which is never a good thing when it comes to maintaining a strong military strategy. 50 billion would be half of what Ukraine got last year. Yeah. Yep. I don't think that the US is looking to throw any more money at that issue right now during the election year. So if Biden wins, then yeah, they'll get their money, and if Biden doesn't win, then who knows? If Novomykhailivka falls, will Russia attack Vuhledar? Yeah, so I'll take you guys back over to the map right here, just so I can show you while I'm talking. So we go down here to Novomykhailivka, obviously in a salient. The Russians are putting pressure on it. This right here, this highway, the 0532, is the main supply line for Vuhledar from Konstantinivka. Once the Russians push in and gain fire control over this, the only available route will be through these fields down through this back road right here, but it's seasonal and it's not very stable. So this is not a permanent solution to the Ukrainian problem of supply in this region. So yes, this area right here is of vital importance if the Russians want to push Vuhledar. I do believe that that's the goal. After Marinka fell, the Russians are going to try to expand out of Marinka. Hopefully, Pabyeta for the Russians is captured, because Pabyeta would open up this entire string of settlements from the north. The Russians would just be able to continue down the 0532, and currently, the Ukrainians are holding this position and preventing the Russians from coming through. And again, this is it has nothing to do with the town itself. Remember, there's just Ukrainian fortifications all throughout this area. It's just littered. This area is just littered with fortifications. So you can't see them because the maps are old, but they're there. Okay. I'll go back over. Let's see. How many months worth of ammo do the Ukrainians have? Nobody knows. Nobody knows. And if anybody tries to tell you, they're wrong. If you stated on your podcast, you stated on your podcast with Alex that Americans are too comfy for a civil war with the events around Texas. Have you changed your mind? No, I think that it's pretty much exactly the same. Nobody want, if you have the option to smoke weed and, watch football and enjoy your family and not worry about the world, that's what people are going to choose to do. Even if that means their freedoms are going away. I promise you, the whole take it from my cold dead hand sort of thing doesn't play so well with fat old boomers that are happy with their retirement. They're not going to be fighting. Young kids don't have any sort of national pride. So, the 18 to 22-year-olds, the usual suspects when it comes to any sort of violent revolution or civil war, are pretty much neutered at this point in the United States. That's the only way I can put it. They have no interest in anything that goes on politically or anything like that. They just don't care. They have no sense of, I don't know what this means. I don't know how to say this. They have no sense of personal duty to the state. They have no sense of what their freedoms mean, how they were gained, how they are maintained. They just don't care. So, yeah, I don't think you're going to get the sort of angry young male population that you need to fight. I don't think that there's old people that are willing to fight either. I just don't. I don't see it happening. Oh, I got muted. I don't know why I got muted. Weird. All right. Uh, I don't know. What was I just talking about? I read a question. What was the question? Oh, why don't you see Ukrainians getting hit by FPV drones? I don't. The Stupolev. I mean, I probably see 40 to 50 Ukrainians die daily from FPV drones and grenade drops. You might just not be on the right Telegram channels. I see it constantly, like every single day. I see VT-40 drones flying in and killing people. There was literally a guy today that just got disappeared by one of those drones. So it's a very brutal. You gotta dig deep sometimes if you want to go find those channels. I follow less of them now. I'm starting to post a lot less of the combat losses. I'm just starting to realize that individual combat losses don't make out the war, and I'm more looking at the larger scope of things. Sometimes I'll post important individual things, but a lot. I mean, I'm not posting every single artillery loss, every single explosion, and everything now as much. Just kind of relaxing from that stuff. How many years have you been going to the gym? Since I was 19 is when I started like understanding the gym. I would say I was going to the gym before then, but I didn't know what I was doing. So, I'm 25 now, so 6 years. 6 years I've been going to the gym. Let's see. Do you have any rough estimates of how many artillery pieces Ukraine still has? No, man. Like I said, when it comes to this, you have equipment that has been damaged, which has been repaired. You have equipment which has been destroyed. So counting equipment is a fool's errand just to start. Second, you're likely to double count things. Things get towed. Things get moved. Weather changes. Things look different. You're more than likely going to count the same tank twice eventually and stuff like that. So anytime anybody's trying to give you a number about, oh, the Ukrainians have X artillery left, that's usually bullshit and a lie. The good way to go about it is pay attention to things like how much artillery fire is being reported. If the Ukrainians are firing a lot less, that means they either have a shortage of barrels to fire the artillery or a shortage of shells to put in the barrels, or both. That's really the only way you can look at it. Right now, it seems like the Ukrainians are at least sustaining themselves with the artillery that they have and the losses that they are sustaining. But the Russians are taking out a lot of artillery, so it's just a guess from anybody. Russia said it will release more info soon about the IL-76 shootdown. When do you think that will come? What do you think it will be downed by a Patriot missile? I have no idea. It was downed by a Ukrainian air defense missile, so either Iris-T, Patriot, something like that, brought up to the border. I don't really know what else they have to prove. I mean, you could see from the parts of the plane that were still around. The shrapnel is consistent with an air defense missile. The Ukrainians claimed it to be an air defense missile. The Ukrainian headquarters for prisoners of war came out and said that the list that they received from the Russians, the documented 65 individuals that were on the plane, were the 65 individuals that were meant to be exchanged, along with the other individuals who were on another IL-76, which ended up turning around and returning. Yeah, it was just kind of a big fuck up. I think that the Ukrainians thought that they were going to get a deputy of the Duma and a general, and that's why they took down that plane. And I think the FSB knew about it and stopped those guys from getting on that plane last second, which is kind of dark both ways, all the ways you look at it, but it is what it is. Let's see. Studying the Finnish war blew my mind when it came to damaged vehicles. Inflated the destroyed Russian tank numbers, since in some cases Russia recovered and repaired a single tank 5 times. Yeah, that is something that can definitely happen in Ukraine too. You know, a lot of people will say, and there's also a weird thing where a lot of the tanks that you see getting destroyed are just abandoned. So yes, it does count as a destroyed tank, but you know, if the crew lives and abandons the tank and then a drone comes and drops a grenade in, that tank is already basically counted as a loss for the Russians, and it'll just be replaced. The Russians have the domestic production to keep replacing the tanks. So counting armor is just kind of a fool's errand, in my personal opinion. Do you think the Ukrainians will ever launch a large-scale offensive like last summer's again? Very potentially. You know, anything's possible. I think the hardest issue is going to be recruitment and getting manpower to a reasonable level now. The attrition that they're sustaining on the front is not tenable. The areas that they're trying to hold at all costs are not tenable. So we'll see. Why would a deputy Duma and a general even fly on a plane transporting POWs? Because they were members of the exchange team. So there are usually diplomats and military officials that go to these exchanges as the points of reference for each side to communicate through. And so that happens. Let's see, not IRST. It doesn't have the range. It could be French or Patriot, of course. Yeah, I mean, it doesn't matter what it is. The Ukrainians said they did it, so it doesn't really matter. The fact that the Ukrainians have Patriots already crosses that red line in terms of their use. The fact that they already have IRST, you know, everything. It doesn't matter what it was that shot it down. It doesn't make a difference. It happened. That's it. What do you say about the reports that Ukraine is training 400,000 soldiers for the spring offensive? Where are these soldiers? I haven't seen any. I mean, you do not hide 400,000 people. That's a ridiculous number. That is insanity. They spent a year sending people to NATO countries out of country, and they had a total of 60,000. It is not possible to get 400,000 people going like that, especially with the situation Ukraine is in. There would not be 400,000 people sitting in reserve. Those people would be sent out to the line to actually fight, because that's what Ukraine needs right now. Do you think a few tactical nukes would end this conflict? End the conflict, depending. I mean, there's not huge armor concentrations. The thing about tactical nukes and nukes in general is that you're using them on areas that are either mass concentration of troops. So if the Russians pushed the Poltergeist and went, they were going for the Rhine, pushing through Berlin and defying all NATO warnings and whatnot, a tactical nuke in that situation would end the conflict, potentially. Not necessarily end the conflict, but do a lot of significant damage. They would potentially, destroy a staging area full of tanks. That's what a tactical nuke is designed for. There's nothing really in Ukraine to use a tactical nuke on. Even if you dropped a nuke on Avdiivka, I mean, the guys in the trenches are going to probably be okay. Not the guys obviously within the burn radius and everything like that. And obviously there's radiation and stuff. But tactical nukes are not like these all-powerful weapons. I don't really think it would solve anything. It would make Russia look absolutely horrible on the world stage. It would make them look incredibly weak. They wouldn't really get anything done. If you mean dropping nukes on cities, I don't know why Russia would do that, but that might end the war quicker, I guess. I don't know. Here we go. $5 from Manveer Sidhu. Keep up the good work, Scott. Do you think Zelensky will escape this conflict alive, assuming Ukraine concludes? Let's see. Do you think Zelensky will escape this conflict alive, assuming Ukraine concedes significant territory to Russia? Yeah, I don't see any problem with the idea of him living in exile, going abroad. I think that that's a very real possibility. That could very well happen. I don't see why that should be discounted for any reason. He has money, obviously, and he has protection, and I don't think that that's going to change. Let's see. I don't know if Ukraine is ever going to concede territory, though. I think it's going to be mostly fought over for a long time. Will Russia retake Robotny? Yeah, that'll happen sooner than later, I would assume. I can't believe they're even still trying to hold that salient. It's completely pointless. It does nothing for the Ukrainians. The idea of using nukes in Ukraine is probably spun by a think tank guru in DC. Yeah, that is like a constant like fear thing. Like the Russians threaten nukes all the time. That's like the constant like motif is like, oh, here are the Russians threatening nukes again. When really a lot of those statements are taken wildly out of context, and the Russians are saying, we're going to use our nuclear deterrents if you use your nuclear deterrents against us. It's just like a constant reminder, and that's just kind of what the Russians do. But then everybody's like, they're going to use nukes. They're always using nukes, nuke this, nuke that, but then they never do it. No, it's just it's what mutually assured destruction is about. It's you stay in your lane, I'll stay in my lane, and we won't have an issue. That's what it's about. It's not like some empty threat. So, yeah. Let's see. Will you do a collab with Russians with Attitude in the future? If they want to. I don't know those guys. So I mean, like I'm not necessarily probably in their wheelhouse. I wouldn't mind doing it. I have no problem with them or anything. How much do you think Ukraine can hold out? How much longer do you think Ukraine could hold out? I've said 2026 is when I think this conflict will come to an end. I think that is a realistic timeline for the Ukrainian government to be squeezed into submission. Let's see. Is there anything left in Robotny to take? No, like I said, a lot of these places are not so much about the towns on the maps. You can just see the name. The name is just a geolocation for where the fighting is taking place. It's usually in the tree lines, on the hills, in the industrial areas around these cities. So it's not really Robotny is definitely not there. It is completely leveled. Let's see. All right. I think that's it. I've been going for an hour and 3 minutes. I appreciate you guys. As soon as there are more news, we'll do another one of these. Hopefully tomorrow. I would like to keep doing them every day, but if there's just nothing to talk about, I'm just getting on here to ramble. Doesn't really feel like a great use of time. So I appreciate everyone. I'm going to work on getting more videos out this week that are recorded with guests. So be on the lookout for those. And if you subscribe to me on Twitter, you will be receiving daily subscriber videos starting tomorrow. So it's time to kick this thing into high gear and get everything working after my vacation. And I appreciate you all. Have a good day. Take care. Be safe. Follow me on Twitter, Telegram, and subscribe to me on here. And like this stream, please, if you enjoyed it. Bye, everybody. Have a great day.